Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, May 20th, 2019, and today we're going to be looking at how Donald Trump can win the 2020 presidential election as of today. So, right now we're going to start off with a blank electoral map. We're not going to distinguish between which Democratic candidate is going to win the nomination. We're just going to assume that Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, which he's most likely, with 99% chance, going to be the nominee, and then we'll just assume that this is a generic Democrat, and it's just going to be an electoral map as to how Donald Trump can actually win this type of election. So right now, looking at the map, there are a number of states that are obviously going to go to the Democratic and Republican parties. That is not something that is necessarily contested. Nobody really argues with the fact that Kansas is red and New York is blue. So we're going to characterize all of those states now. These are states that are probably not going to change in favor of the president, regardless of how bad a Democratic candidate is, because these states are extremely, extremely Democratic. And I mean, extremely Democratic, and that's something that Donald Trump is always going to have to face. Republican candidates are always going to have to face that. Democratic candidates are always going to have to face that. In terms of solid Republican states, these aren't states that could really have a real chance at flipping. Now, for the same thing goes for Republican states. There are a number of Republican states that don't have a real chance at flipping, and it'd just be completely unrealistic if we did characterize one of these states as a Democratic state, unless there were some extreme circumstances where it could actually go a certain way. For example, Illinois in 2008, but since then probably has no real chance at flipping. And since we are considering a Donald Trump type of election where he is to win with this electoral map, we're not going to factor in any of those possible red to blue states, and just focus on the states that are going to flip from blue to red, or stay from red to red. But right now we start off our electoral map with 125 electoral votes for Donald Trump and 182 for the Democratic Party. And that's expected. That's the same exact thing every single election season, and for good reason. These are the same exact states that are always considered Democratic and Republican states, respectively. Not respectively, that doesn't apply to this, but they're just the same Democratic and Republican states that are always safe states. You know, there are very there are very few times when these states particularly get close. If you look at 2008, that was the last time you could argue that any of these safe states were close, for the case of Indiana, Missouri, and Montana. But other than that, they weren't really too close. If you look at 2016 results, not close whatsoever. And since Donald Trump is running for re-election, a lot of these states are likely to stay within that close column. Again, there's a lot of arguments between Bernie Sanders being the nominee, Joe Biden being the nominee, or someone else of the other 21 candidates besides those two. And you know, a lot of them do have particular appeal to individual states like Pete Buttigieg in Indiana, or Beto O'Rourke in Texas. But as of right now, these are the generalized safe Republican states. Now, there are some other quote-unquote safe Republican states that aren't necessarily safe in terms of the margin, but they're always going to go to the GOP, just the margin may be a little bit less than 15% or more. And those are states like Texas. Texas is probably not going to go to the Democratic Party in 2020. It's just very unlikely at this point in time. And even with someone like Beto O'Rourke, it'd be very, very, not plausible for that type of situation to occur. So the state of Texas goes into the likely column for the GOP, joined by the state of Georgia and North Carolina. Now, North Carolina and Georgia, I definitely see an argument as to them getting closer, but I still see them going in favor of the GOP regardless of the Democratic nominee. These are two states that have held its Republican identity for a very long time, and the only time actually all three of these states, North Carolina, Georgia, and Texas, ever got close were either in 2016 for the cases of Georgia and Texas, or 2008 when North Carolina went blue by 14,000 votes. That is not a swing state. That is a state that had a fluke, because keep in mind the last time it went to a Democrat, I believe before that might have been either Carter or even 64. But state of North Carolina went to the Democratic Party by 14,000 votes. It was extremely close, and it's been Republican ever since. Though it's historically a Democratic governor state, in terms of the governor elections, this one is a Republican state on a presidential scale. And that makes sense if we're looking at the candidates like Mitt Romney, and Donald Trump. These are two candidates that can do really well with a conservative base. Mitt Romney did a lot better in Georgia and Texas than Donald Trump, but obviously demographic changes also do come into an effect here. But all three of these states I do see as likely states for Donald Trump if he is to win the 2020 election. Now, the same thing goes. There are some of these states that are going to be likely in favor of the Democratic Party. States include Virginia and New Mexico. These are two states that I can say safely off the bat that these are going to be likely states in favor of the Democratic Party, based on the 2016 numbers, their 2018 results, and upcoming election data for the 2020 presidential election. Donald Trump is not popular in either of these states, and it really shows in terms of the way that they voted in the past, and also how the election data is coming in for right now. And also, demographic shifting is not necessarily helping. If you're looking in Northern Virginia, getting a lot more Democratic, New Mexico getting a lot more Democratic, it's not good for the president, considering that he needs as many Republican voters as possible. And these states also went for Hillary Clinton back in 2016, so they weren't necessarily his states to begin with. But again, if Donald Trump is to win, he's going to need to hold on to a number of these states. If we're looking at Iowa, that is a state that he could possibly hold. And I do think that this one actually could go into the likely column. It really just depends on the Democratic nominee. As of right now, I'm going to be safe with this and hold it in the lean column. But Donald Trump is probably going to carry that state regardless of the nominee, because it's probably going to go more in favor of the Republican Party as we get closer. But again, anything can change at this instant. And also Ohio would also need to go to the president. That's something that really needs to go without a doubt. That one needs to go to Donald Trump as a baseline. Now, the rest of these states can really fluctuate. I'm being completely honest with this. These remaining states can really go either way in 2020. Now, it's crazy seeing Colorado and Nevada as swing states and not Ohio and Iowa, but it makes sense. Those states were not as close as Colorado and Nevada, and it's really interesting considering that both of those states are typically swing states, but not so much this election season. Donald Trump did very well with both of these states back in 2016, and it's definitely showing if you look at the governor election in 2018 in the state of Ohio, for example. It was a 5% win, which isn't exactly the biggest thing, but keep in mind that it was supposed to be a Democratic wave year. When Republicans aren't necessarily turning out in huge droves and numbers, the Democratic Party is expected to flourish, as expected. That's redundant, but they are expected to flourish, and that's not exactly what happened in these particular states. Yes, the House elections went in favor of the Democrats, which is something they have going for them, but Ohio, we really didn't see much gain for the Democrats there whatsoever. Just a hold, and I don't even think they had one pickup, or maybe only one pickup. But that puts the Democrats at 200 electoral votes and the Republican Party at 218. That leaves the entire Rust Belt open, Florida, and then parts of the Sun Belt and the Northeast. The Northeast is pretty interesting considering that Donald Trump, if he is to win re-election, will likely carry the same 2nd district and Maine's 2nd congressional district. But also, if we're looking at it, there is a possibility he does win it at large. He can afford to lose it if he were discussing how he can win in 2020. There are many scenarios. I would say the most likely path is going to be through the Rust Belt again, possibly gaining Minnesota, possibly losing it, possibly losing Michigan and holding on to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Heck, possibly losing Wisconsin, Michigan, and holding Pennsylvania, or whatever, a variant of the three. Things definitely need to go through the Rust Belt. If Donald Trump wants a realistic chance, we're probably not going to see Colorado red and Michigan blue. That's probably not how we're going to see it, even though that could have been a very real possibility back in the year 2000 or 2004 or 2008 or even 2012, but just not so much 2016 and above. So Colorado, I'm actually going to characterize as a lean Democratic state. Donald Trump is definitely going to carry the state of Arizona. I think that one would be a lean margin, but I do think that one's going to go to him inevitably, unless a candidate, let's say, for example, Joe Biden, is a really, really good candidate and focuses a lot of attention there, which is still probably not going to happen. Going up to the Northeast, though, the Democratic Party is probably going to carry that 1st district. The 2nd district is probably going to go by a tilt margin, puts the Democrats at 212, the Republican Party at 230. Now, here's where it actually gets down to the dirty. Nebraska's 2nd district is going to go by a likely margin. That one's probably going to be that way, regardless of who the Democratic nominee is. But if we're looking across the Rust Belt, this is an area that Donald Trump can definitely win in. He can definitely win in Michigan. He can definitely win in Pennsylvania. He can definitely win in Wisconsin. He's done it before. It's not impossible. That officially makes him the next president. He's going to carry Florida by a likely margin, leaner likely margin. That's really how I see it for 2020. It's going to be extremely hard for even Biden or Sanders to even win in the state of Florida. That, so far, I think is a lost cause for the Democratic Party. But again, we will see in about a year when I come back to this and go through it again. New Hampshire as well. That is a state that I could also go in favor of Donald Trump. If we're looking, Minnesota could definitely go in favor of Donald Trump. A lot of you have argued that Minnesota is not going to go in the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. But we're talking about a scenario where Donald Trump is to win this election. If he's actually going to go into 2020 and come out the victor, there's a really strong chance that he's able to pick up at least a couple of electoral votes based off history alone, that most presidential candidates win more electoral votes the second time around. I don't think necessarily that it is possible for Trump to win in Minnesota. Don't get me wrong. Based off the current array of Democrats, I don't think it's likely whatsoever. But this is a scenario where he's winning in 2020, and we're discussing how he can win. So when I say that he can definitely win in the state of Minnesota, I'm referring to this tiny bit of scenario where he does win this election. It definitely gets a lot larger of a possibility of a win, above 60% when he runs against someone like Bill de Blasio, which is coming out in a couple of days where I'm going to make a video about that. Donald Trump would definitely do very, very, very well against him. Where if it's someone like Joe Biden, he's definitely going to have a lot more competition. So I don't want to get the terminology confused. Just know which type of I guess way I'm referring to a specific state. Nevada and North Carolina, Nevada and New Hampshire both can go in favor of Donald Trump. It's a very real possibility in terms of a re-election bid, but this is not the most likely scenario in terms of the possibilities for 2020. I think the most likely scenario, if Donald Trump was to expand on his electoral votes and win re-election, would just be by giving Nevada and New Hampshire to the Democratic Party, and then you're set. 10 more electoral votes to the Democrats, and then that finalizes the electoral map. But this is how Donald Trump could theoretically win re-election through these states alone. I think the rest of the Democratic states that have already characterized as Democratic states are pretty much off limits for Donald Trump at this point, with the exception of Maine at large. So that wraps up today's video. Thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.